Be really like liberal when you're budgeting, and avoid tax shops. Seriously, don't go to them unless you absolutely know exactly what you need and you're going to go in and out, because you'll end up spending more money. Hello, this is Riding with Ree. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. My channel is all about being a first-time horse owner with a city career, so if that sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe and join us. Woody and I have just hit our 1-year anniversary. I've just owned him for a year, and I really wanted to do a sit-down video where I tell you all the things that I learned in my first year as a horse owner. This is something I've wanted to do ever since I bought him, and I've been trying to collect information as I've gone to share with you. So I have a list of 10 things that I've learned throughout the year, and I'm going to walk you through it now, hopefully with some examples. So the first thing I learned about being a horse owner is spend the time to get it right. It is an incredibly frustrating process buying horses. I looked at absolutely thousands and thousands over the course of about 3 or 4 months. I spent hours and hours on HorseQuest. I spoke to hundreds of people on WhatsApp. And thanks to my coach, who was helping support me finding the right horses and keeping me on track with like what I actually wanted, I only ended up viewing, I think, 4 or 5 horses. And of course, Woody was the last one that I saw, the 5th horse. But I hear from a lot of people, I can feel their impatience with wanting to find a horse, and what I would say is caution yourself against just being like, oh, it'll be fine, because unless you're somebody who buys and sells quite often and you're quite comfortable with buying and selling horses and you don't think you'll have that emotional attachment, once you buy the horse, that's it. You've bought them, and the conveyor belt of costs just keeps coming. The farrier, the vet, the coaching, the livery, it all just keeps coming. And so when you buy the wrong one, not only are you now on this kind of conveyor belt of costs, but you might potentially then have to find them a new home, which has a real kind of emotional pull on a lot of people. I would certainly find that difficult. That's not to say that once you've bought, you can't ever change your mind, but I would just really think when you are looking at horses, try and keep yourself calm and not get kind of carried away with just wanting one. Spend the time getting it right. It's just like the night before the vetting, and I'm just like watching Below Deck on my laptop in bed, trying not to get excited. I'm speaking to a couple of people who know that it's happening, and like my emotions are just on a roller coaster. But like I'm getting really excited now, and I'm trying so hard not to, just in case something goes wrong tomorrow, but like, I'm so excited. Could have a horse in a few days. The second thing I want to share is a slightly controversial one, but at least for me, horse insurance has 100% been worth it. This is something that I think I learned a lot about this year, and there were a lot of things that you just don't know and don't get taught when you're a first-time horse owner that you should know about horse insurance. So I've teamed up with SEIB insurance brokers to do a whole series on horse insurance specifically, because there are things that I learned that I wish someone had told me, so I'm going to do that for you guys. But I would say that it's worth it. I know that there's a kind of school of thought of like putting away a certain amount of money every month and then using that if a rainy day comes up. But I personally have already made a claim this year, not a massive one, but a claim. There's always someone on my yard who has a lame horse or an issue with a horse. Like, these things are so common, and I think unless you have a big nest egg, just get insurance, because some of these costs, if you're the type of person who would do anything and everything for your horse and do the surgery and do the investigations, your nest egg isn't going to cover it. That is just my point of view, but for me, horse insurance has been a really important safety net. Equally, I know people who have had claims refused this year, and that is a really difficult thing to marry up with horse ownership and whether to have insurance. As I said, there's a whole series on this in particular, but the point I'm making is that for me, horse insurance is worth it, hands down. The third point I want to make is, again, one that you may not be expecting to hear from me, and that's that budgets work to an extent. So I talked a lot before I bought my first horse about budgeting every month, and I worked out the exact cost of everything.
So firstly, you're going to write down the costs. I have figured all of these out already, so I'm going to paste them in and then let's talk about it. So 5-day livery in London, that is 5 days where somebody else is turning out your horse, bringing in your horse, mucking out, and occasionally other things on top, so rug changes and hooves being picked out, etc. It's going to cost you around £450.
And to an extent, those costs are true and they fit. I had a buffer between what I was expecting to pay and what I could afford, and I would say that every month to some degree it's either higher or lower, and I think you have some control over that. So I would say know your budgets for your livery, your farrier, anything that's regular, and then everything else have the flexibility to say, actually, I'm not going to enter that competition this month, or I'm going to do more competitions this month because I'm feeling like actually I want to spend more time in spring and summer spending more money, and then in the winter I want to spend less money. I think it's just about choosing where to spend your money, but being aware that it's probably going to be more expensive than you think it is, particularly in the first year, because you may come up against costs that you weren't expecting, like your insurance might be more expensive than you think it was, you might not realise you have to worm as often as you do, perhaps your horse needs shoes more often than you were budgeting for, 4 weeks instead of 8 weeks. I would just say be really liberal when you're budgeting, and avoid tack shops. Seriously, don't go to them unless you absolutely know exactly what you need and you're going to go in and out, because you'll end up spending more money, and the reality is you'll end up with loads and loads of stuff in your tack room that you just don't need. It happens with rugs, it happens with numbness. It's really, really hard to keep a tight set of things, so just don't buy stuff unless you need to. Number 4, a good support system pays for itself. I've talked before about choosing full livery. This works really well for me in my job and my schedule, but also the support system that I've been able to get as a first-time horse owner on full livery has been absolutely worth its weight in gold. I'm really, really lucky to have a coach who's also my yard owner, and an amazing team, amazing farrier, amazing vet, and these are people that I ask really big questions to when I'm worried about stuff, but also really basic questions. Even though I've ridden since I was a child, I'm still asking people what's everyone rugging up in? I don't know what rug to put on Woody, or oh, do you think he looks a bit weird today, or whatever. And I think when you're a first-time horse owner, you can feel the weight of horse ownership really heavily, and having somebody who has done it for years and can just help support you is worth its weight in gold. So find a support system, whether that's a coach, whether that's somebody at your yard who's much more experienced, find a great farrier, find a great vet, find people who vibe with you. Number 5, this comes back to something I said way before I bought Woody, which was that I wanted to do the rug liner system.
What I decided is I asked a lot of different people on a lot of groups and on my channels as well about liner systems. So a rug liner system is when you buy an outer rug and then you buy liners, or you buy sort of under rugs, layers, a bit like base layers for humans. You buy them in different weights, you clip them to the under of the rug, and then you keep the outer rug and you have a bunch of liners in different weights, which can make that rug more versatile. So if we start with, I've got the temperature guide down.
For me, rug liners are 100% worth it. Not all of my rugs are rug liners, because there have been times where I've had to have a rug really quickly, someone's given me a rug, or they've been out of stock. But if I could have rug liners all the time, I absolutely would. So right now I have one 0-gram outdoor rug and a 100-gram liner under that. I have a 200-gram stable rug and a 100-gram liner under that. I use Premier Equine as my rug liner system, but as I understand it, the Horseware Island rug liners also fit in the Premier Equine ones. I spoke to the girls on my yard as well who change rugs all the time, and they say that rug liners are actually really easy and often easier than rugs themselves, so it works from that point of view. And from a washing point of view, it's much easier to wash rug liners in your own washing machine in a pet bag than it is to constantly be having rugs go to professional cleaners. So every little helps when it comes to money saving, but rug liners, 100% worth it in my opinion. Number 6, and in the same world as that, choose where to invest heavily and where you can save money. And this will kind of be a process as you try out lots of different things, but there are areas where I think you should be investing more. For me, like rugs, I want rugs that can last for a long time. But then there are things that I look back and I'm like, would I be buying that and spending all that money again? Probably not. So a couple of examples of that is I'm really, really glad that I spent a bit more on my Premier Equine outdoor rug, because even though Woody absolutely shredded it.
Hey Ree, I think this is Woody, right? He's got a massive gash, look. I think that's Woody. Sorry to be the breaker of bad news.
When I got it repaired, it was still less than the cost of a cheap rug, and it's still going strong a year later with absolutely no leaks. Whilst I was getting that one repaired, I bought a really cheap outdoor rug and it leaked straight away. So I was like, proof's in the pudding. However, I bought a really expensive fly rug for the summer, and he hardly wore it because actually he was out at night when there weren't that many flies, and it was quite an expensive rug. I got it cleaned last year and I'll have it this summer, but would I have spent that money again? Probably not. I would have probably spent it on something else. I got it in the sale, but it was still expensive. Similarly, I was lucky enough to do a partnership with Nailers earlier this year where I tried out the Shire's Velocity bridle. Very reasonably priced. They were between £69 and about £79. That is now my bridle. It's the one I use every single day. I love it, and it's not, you know, hundreds and thousands of pounds. Not that a bridle would be thousands, I think, but the point is, like, sometimes you don't need to spend loads and loads and loads of money. Think long term. This is something that I have tried to keep in my head ever since I bought Woody, and this is more for people who are sort of buying a horse for life. Try and think long term with everything. So for example, way back in July, I think it was July last year, when my saddler came out and said that Woody was asymmetric, I had a couple of choices. One was to be like, I don't care, I'm going to go and work with a new saddler who will fit him now. The other was to back off actually getting a new saddle, stick with the dressage saddle and do 6 months, 6 months of hard work where we tried to correct the asymmetry in him and in me, not jump, and then come back. And I chose to go down that route, and now he's stronger than he ever was before. So I try and take this approach of like, if you're building your dream house, you need to make sure that every foundation is laid correctly. So I think if you're thinking about whether to take a shortcut in your training or whether to go for the long haul route, try and think long term with everything that you do. Because I think you'll end up with a stronger horse and ride a partnership at the end of it. In a similar vein to that, one of the biggest pieces of advice I've learned over the last few months is to make hay while the sun shines. Horse ownership is so unpredictable. Horses are always hurting themselves. You'll be off. There might be some problem with you or with work or an injury. You never know when you're going to have like a break, a moment to make hay. So I think what I learned when Woody had all that time off with the abscess was like, when he's sound and when I'm sound, you've just got to go for it. So enter that competition, you know, go for that ride, like do the thing that you want to do and enjoy it, because there might be something around the corner that means you're not going to be able to for a long time. Obviously, safety on top of all that, you know, don't take your new horse out on a fun ride in the first month when you don't know them well and end up falling off. Remind you of anyone? And Woody starts spooking at the statue, and rather than bringing him back, I push him on and he trips on the track here and we fall. My 9th one is something I touched on in a couple of videos back, and that's that horse ownership isn't linear and that learning is always happening. So it goes back to building these foundations and making hay while the sun shines. I was sort of expecting this year to be like, oh, I'd get him, I'd spend 3 months getting to know him, then we'd build up the flat width, then the jumping, then we'd be spring, summer, we'd be doing loads of stuff. Hasn't been like that at all. And I think sometimes you see professional riders who get young horses and they're out in a few months and they're doing all these amazing things, and you sort of forget that you're a hobby rider who has a full-time job and only gets to ride a few times a week, and it takes a lot longer. And not only does it take longer, but you might find actually there are areas that you need to work on before you can go jump those amazing show jumps. So it's not linear, and I think be comfortable with that, be okay with that, embrace it, because as I said before, if you're thinking long term, all of that work that you're putting in now in the first year is going to make the rest of building your dream house, your dream horse, so much easier. My final piece of advice: buying Woody has been the best decision that I have ever made, and it's really silly to get emotional about it, but we're emotional about these animals. It was like a lifelong dream for me, and it's something that I worried about doing all along, really, because I was so worried about the costs and everything. It is the best decision I've ever made. I do not regret a single moment of owning him, and I can't wait to have the rest of our ownership together and the rest of his life and my life. But I'm really, really glad that I planned. I'm glad that I worked with my coach to find him and got all of her expertise, because there were a couple of horses I might have bought without her guidance and I might be in a completely different situation now. I'm really glad I planned my budget, even if sometimes I go above, I feel prepared for it. I'm glad that I plan, you know, when I'm going to see him and how it's going to work alongside work. I think doing all of the organising and planning means that you can actually have fun and enjoy it. But yeah, it's the best decision I've ever made. So if you're thinking about it, crunch your numbers, see what your support network is, think about the long term, what does your life look like in the future, and would you want a horse in it, and how does that work? And if it all fits, do it. Just do it. Horse ownership is the best. Thank you so much for watching this week's video. I hope that you found it useful. If you did, leave me any questions or comments or thoughts below, and if you want to continue to follow our journey, then subscribe and join us. I would love to have you as part of the community. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next Friday at 4 p.m. GMT. Bye for now.